Hey, what's going on, guys? Realm Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, I want to go over something that has been kind of plaguing the game for pretty much ever now. And we see it posted all the time on Reddit and other sources where people have been saying that they can't find groups for whatever reason. They're queuing up as DPS and they can't find a tank, they can't find a healer. And this quite literally makes it to where people cannot play the game. And this is nothing new. We see it in Classic WoW. We see it through all the different iterations of World of Warcraft. You have the warriors who don't want to tank. The wailing caverns run for whatever reason. They'd rather just DPS it, even though they could tank it with just a simple two-hand axe. They don't even need a sword and shield or anything like that. They don't need to be spec prot. But people just don't want to play the roles that require more responsibility, like tank or healer. So I think that's the number one thing that we need to look at here is those two roles have so much more responsibility than DPS. By default, you're going to lose a lot of people who don't want that responsibility. So just by default, tanking is going to be very difficult because you are the sole leader of the group. You call the shots on the route, how many mobs are pulled, how those mobs are pulled, the pacing of the entire dungeon. Everything is really decided by the tank. Then from a healer's perspective, of course, if you look away from your screen for 1 second, somebody could die. If you make a single mistake, pretty much it's a wipe. Especially if we're going back to like Mythic Plus here, we're talking about tyrannical bosses that last for 2 to 3 minutes. There's a ton of mechanics being thrown at you. If your party doesn't have a battle res, you're just not going to be able to survive the damage that's going out. So playing as tank or healer, you can't make those big mistakes, because if you do, the group literally just dies. If you lose a healer for 10 seconds of a fight, that is a huge deal on a high key. Even if they do end up battle resing the healer, if they're having to cast battle res while a huge AoE mechanic is going off, the healer's down and he can't heal through it, it's a wipe. Versus a DPS, you can be down a DPS, sure, it will take longer over the course of a tyrannical boss fight, but in most cases, it's completely doable down a single DPS rather than a single healer or tank, right? So by default, healer and tank just has more responsibility, more things that they have to deal with. Now, on the flip side of that, playing tank or healer, you can get into groups almost instantly. And that is one of the main arguments that people have going for tanks and healers is, sure, it's harder, but at the same time, you can form a group instantly and you can get in more overall dungeon runs throughout the course of a season than a DPS can. Simply just due to the fact of how easily you can form your groups. So let's just kind of talk about, how could Blizzard incentivize people to play either the healer or the tank role, because it's very obvious that it's been this way for multiple expansions now. Not many people are wanting to pick up the roles. Of course, there's always going to be those few who do, and we're able to get groups through. But as a DPS, you're normally waiting for 10 to 20 minutes to sign up for a key, unless you're signing up for a key that is way below your character's skill level and his IO score. Let's talk about some ideas that Blizzard could potentially put into the game to incentivize players to play these roles. And when we come up with these ideas, I don't want to punish another role. So for example, I don't want to say, hey, let's take some of that responsibility that tanks and healer has and just give it to the DPS. It's not something that I want to do. I think that's part of what makes DPS so fun is they're I'm not saying they don't have responsibility, they do. But just the fact that you can just kind of go into a key and focus solely on your damage is really fun. And I don't really want to take that away from the DPS. And instead, I would rather make it more fun to play tank and healer rather than punish DPS to kind of give you that level playing ground. So the first thing I would throw out there for tank players and healer players are going to be titles or mounts. So Blizzard could easily tie this into your Mythic Plus score. You push so high on the tank or healer role, and that could be tied into a title or amount, just kind of based off IO score. You could also give tanks or healers maybe a special currency with a special vendor that they could go to buy specific tank and healer items that no other specs in the game have access to. I think another thing that they already do with Heroic Dungeons is they give people those big caches for tanking or healing a dungeon. So these will just kind of pop up randomly throughout the week. And if you do see that that specific role is in need of more players and you can queue up for it, you can get your cash with a ton of gold and extra stuff in it. And that kind of incentivizes players to do that. So those are all okay ideas, but I don't think it really fixes any sort of core issue with people wanting to play tank or healer. Like, sure, all that's nice. Yes, it will get more players into the pool. However, I don't think that's the best idea or the only idea that they should implement to actually tackle this. So I think that World of Warcraft is, and I kind of talked about this a little bit in my last video, it is a very alt-heavy game. So I think most people kind of stick to their mains over the course of several expansions, but throughout the expansion, a lot of people do dip into alts. And this is really where I think Blizzard could have a huge win with some sort of system that incentivizes people to tank or heal is through their alts. We also talked earlier about a special vendor, right? This vendor can be only accessible by tanks and healers. I think a great addition to this is allow people who tank and heal to get a special currency to spend at these vendors to buy gear for their alts. So we already have the addition of the Warbound system into the game. So we could quite literally just plug into the Warband system and allow us to transfer items through our Warband bank and then be able to have our tanks and healers really gear out our alts more efficiently. And, you know, all these ideas are just sort of thoughts that I've had over the past couple of days. They're not necessarily what, like, the direction Blizzard should go or anything, but I guess the purpose of this video is to kind of create a place for discussion on this. You may agree, you may not agree, doesn't really matter. I want to see in the comments below just what your thoughts are on a way to be able to address this going into the future. I mean, it is an issue that has been in this game for as long as WoW's been released, you know, for 20 years. And I do think that this would really help with player retention. Kind of like we talked about in our last video, how seasons do kind of die off towards the middle of the season. We see that huge drop in player numbers. And I think a lot of that has to do with how difficult it is to start an alt. You know, it might not be that difficult for a tank or a healer who can get instant queues, who can get into groups instantly, but somebody like a mage or a warlock who doesn't have that option, the hardest problem is finding a group. You will sit in queue for 10 to 15 minutes, even if you run your own queue for every single dungeon that you do. And if you need, let's just say, for example, 50 to 100 dungeons to be able to gear out your character, just doing some quick math here, you're sitting in queue for about 10 hours just to gear out this character. And that is on the low end. It's really 10 to 20 hours that you're sitting in a queue waiting for people to sign up for your key, or you're trying to sign up for other people's keys. And that is 100% attributed to the tank and healer shortage in the game. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you think that this is even an issue at all? Maybe I'm just blowing something out of proportion here that's just not an issue at all, but I have seen it throughout every single Mythic Plus season, all the Reddit posts, all the people complaining about the shortage of tanks and healers and how people don't want to play these specs because they're so much more difficult. So I was just kind of curious what everybody thought on this. So let me know in the comments section below if you agree or disagree with some of this stuff, or maybe there's a solution that you have that we can make a follow-up video on and kind of discuss that. Okay, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you on the next one.